Hello and welcome. Today I've got for you the HP Omen 16. This is not the HP Omen 16 Max, which I reviewed earlier in this year, featuring with the RTX 5080. This one here is the standard HP Omen 16. This one features the RTX 5070. And in this review, we're going to take a look at what this has to offer. It's not the HP Omen Slim, although I'm quite excited to look at that in the near future as well. But as you can see here, this is just the standard HP Omen. So without any other monikers, suffixes, or prefixes. So pretty much the standard offering that you'll find on the market comes in 5050, 5060, and 5070 variants. And in this video, we're going to take a look at this device here and see if this is a promising offering from HP, as we've seen with other offerings this year. And just as a quick disclaimer, this laptop was provided to me for review by HP. Thanks very much to them for doing so. However, all of the opinions you'll find in this video are entirely my own, and nobody has had editorial review of the content herein. That said, if you like the products I review and wish to purchase them, check the links in the description below. I often include discount codes to help you save a little bit of money. And as always, if you like my content, please click like, subscribe, and click that notification bell so you're the first to know when there's new content available here. And if you want to go a little bit further and really help the channel out, use the coffee link in the description below to give us a tip. It's a small gesture, but it really goes a long way to help independent creators such as myself. Okay, let's take an overview of this HP Omen 16 for 2025. So first things first, let's take a look at the lid here. So we have a metal lid. We have some nice Omen branding up here. Now this is not lighting up. There's no RGB here. And tucked away in the corner here on the rear of this laptop here is Omen 16, 016, designed and built for gaming. A nice little touch there. We have some nice solid hinges here. But you can see here, because this is a black plastic material or black metal material, you're going to get a lot of fingerprints and grease on here, so you will need to keep a lint-free cloth handy so you can kind of wipe this down occasionally if you're OCD like I am about keeping your laptops clean of fingerprints. Now let's start and take a look at the port situation on offer here. So on the left hand side of this device, HP is doing pretty well for ports overall, I think, this year. On the right hand side, we have a single 5 gigabits per second USB port. Keep in mind this is a mid-range offering, so you're not going to get full 3.2, 20 gigabits or even 10 gigabits ports all around here. We do have some heat venting on the side here for exhaust. On the rear, HP has decided to keep all of the heavier ports on the rear, which is a nice touch, so thank you for that. We have more heat venting here flanking the ports. In the center, we have a power barrel pin power adapter. We have a full-size Ethernet jack, although facing down. We have a full-size HDMI port and a 10 gigabits per second USB-A port. And on the right hand side of this device, we have a single or additional 5 gigabits per second USB-A port, a USB Type-C port at 10 gigabits per second, or does that say 20? Sorry, a single USB Type-C port at 10 gigabits per second, and a headphone microphone combo jack. Now, on the rear for this device, this is something I want to highlight, which is a common theme for many laptops and devices this year. So on the rear, there's something I want to highlight. This is very common for many laptops this year. So we have on the Omen 16 this island here for cooling, which kind of elevates the laptop's heating elements where the heat pipes would be, so allow more airflow in. And of course, to go along with that, to bring in that additional airflow, we've got now here higher Z height for these rubber feet here. So if we look at it kind of in this profile view, I hope you can see that on the camera, that the Z height on these has increased compared to prior years, because we can have up to 250 watts of cooling here, particularly in the Omen Max, and that design has carried over to this Omen series as well. So despite only having a 50, 70 and lower end components or lower wattage components comparatively speaking, we still have the increased Z height of these. So if you're somebody who likes to use these on your lap, you're going to certainly feel these sitting on your lap for quite a while. So that's just something in terms of comfort that I wanted to bring to your attention. Now let's do a one-hand open on this device here. As long as you're gentle with her, she'll be kind to you. So just take your time and open it gently. Don't try to rip it open, because if you do, you're going to get this happening. It's going to try to slide around everywhere. Do not do that. Be nice to her, okay? You want her to last. So here, you open this up. We have a nice display up here. Let's talk quickly about what's inside on the deck here. So we have a metal deck here. You're going to get fingerprints on this as well. You need to keep it clean, so keep a lint-free cloth handy with you. We have a nice Keyboard up here, QWERTY keys with a numpad to the side. Those of you who are numpad nuts, well, I've seen plenty of you in my comments, and there it is. You have a numpad for you. I'm not a big fan. I would rather prefer the QWERTY keyboard because I'm more used to using key combinations to perform all of my functions from my programmer days, and but just personal preference here. I like the overall pitch of these keys. HP has always made great keyboards. I would say they're probably second in terms of my preference for keyboards and tactility and feedback, and number one, of course, would be Lenovo and their Legion series laptops, and pretty much all Lenovo devices. So I like this bold font here. The RGB is pretty good. We do get two stages of backlight here, so low, medium, and high, and then off. Basically, this is a 4-zone RGB. You're not going to get per key RGB in here. It can be controlled through the Omen Gaming Hub. We'll take a look at that a little bit later. Down here below the keyboard, we have a nice trackpad here. HP calls this their image pad, which is, I guess, some sort of a mylar surface. It seems very similar, or feels very similar to what we see from the Lenovo Legions. It's a soft surface, uninterrupted, no buttons or anything like that, and it feels pretty good to the touch. And sounds pretty decent as well, not bad at all, I would say. And all the multi-touch gestures I've been able to perform on here without issue. I've been able to use this trackpad without the mouse without much frustration. Now, these hinges here are pretty solid. The 16-inch 1200p display here, let's talk about that briefly for a quick second before we jump into more display stuff later. So this is a 1200p display, 16 inches, about 400 nits, has variable refresh rate on board, and goes up to 165 hertz with pretty decent response times, I would say. I've tried playing some FPS on this, and it's held up pretty well. Now, the other thing to say is this laptop comes equipped with the RTX 5070, so I know what people are saying, hey, we want high-res displays, but I think pairing this two options was the right choice. So the Core 2 Ultra 7 255H here, or excuse me, let's just take a look at what the CPU is while we're here, and then we can make more. So we have the Core Ultra 7 255H here paired with the RTX 5070, 8 gigabytes of VRAM on that GPU. That means 1080p gaming is not going to be any issue here whatsoever. Now, if you were to go with a higher resolution display, the trade-off there is going to be that the 1600p display is a little bit harder to push for the RTX 5070 if you go into higher resolutions, higher quality textures, and in some games that are quite demanding, you may end up with stuttering or other kind of performance issues because of a smaller VRAM buffer. So this is definitely the right combination here. I know some of you will complain that it's not a higher resolution display. We want that high pixel density. Although I agree with you, I think this was the right matching, so good job there, HP. In addition, we have this, two sides of narrow bezels. However, we still have a large chin here and a large forehead up top. I would like to see HP move away from this, which means we'll get a much more compact device so they can actually go 16 inches, down to maybe even closer to a 15-inch form factor, or perhaps they can go larger, which is what I would prefer, with a 17-inch display, and they can kill off their HP Omen 17 series and boost that up to an HP Omen 18. That would be awesome. Now, the other nice thing about HP is they are including these physical webcam shutters, which I absolutely love. Legion offers e-shutters often on the side here to disable their webcams, but the camera lens still stays open, it's uncovered. I know if you're some of those people who are paranoid about things like that, as I am, you want to have a physical shutter so it's far preferable. Now we do get a little bit of screen wobble here, but generally in typing and everyday use, you're not going to get that. Generally, when you open it, you're going to get a little bit of lid wobble here. Not something too much to complain about. We do not have any biometric authentication on here. There's no fingerprint reader, and we certainly don't have Windows IR Hello Camera up here. This is a simple 1080p 30 FPS webcam here, enough to do all of your video conferencing, meetings, classes online, stuff like that, but it's not going to win any awards in terms of video quality. Now, because this is an AI enabled CPU, we do have an NPU on board here. As we can see, there is an NPU here, the Intel AI Boost, that's built into the Core Ultra 7 255H, so you can do some AI effects using Windows Camera or even other apps that support the camera effects such as centering, staging, etc. The other nice thing to say about this laptop here, I think it feels very nice in the hand. The fact that from prior years, HP has gone from sharp corners and sharp edges here to nice smoothly rounded corners and tapered, and just there's a slight bezel and a slight taper at the edge, I would say, on most of the surfaces here. So it feels pretty good. Resting your palms on here, it's not going to really dig into your hands, as I've had issues with the prior years Omens and Omen Max series. So this is something that's going to be, I appreciate quite a bit. The other nice thing about getting into the Omen laptops, if you have any HyperX peripherals, HP now owns HyperX. That means any peripherals that you have, a mouse, a keyboard, headphones, are going to be able to connect to this without requiring the dongle. That dongle is basically built into these HP Omen laptops and allows you to connect your HyperX peripherals to your Omen laptop with just a single connectivity click. All right, taking a look at the display here. So if we talk about the profile view and how the lid goes far back here, so we're not going to get a 180 degrees flat hinge here. We do have, typical 135 degrees, I think, which is pretty common for many laptops here. So that is something to be expected. And the screen itself is pretty thin. It's unlike what you'd see from either OLED panels, because they have that extra glass layering, or even mini LED displays where you have to have a nice and more robust backlight. So the panel itself here actually is pretty light in terms of comparison to OLED or even mini LED displays. Now this one here is 100% sRGB coverage, 16-inch 1920 by 1200 display, running at 165 Hz refresh rate with some few milliseconds of response time. The actual performance has been pretty good on this display. If we take a look at the display settings here, despite what you see with the background, I'm actually running at the native 1920 by 1200 resolution of this display. And right now, because I'm unplugged, the refresh rate does not automatically dial down, unfortunately, on this case. However, it does go into an eco mode using the Omen Gaming Hub software when you do unplug the laptop. I'm just not sure why the 60 Hz toggle for the display isn't also included as part of that eco mode. Hence, the max refresh rate of this display is 165 Hz. It is an 8-bit color panel, so you're not going to get the highest dynamic range from this panel. It is certainly not an HDR rated panel, so those are something you're giving up from a more expensive HDR enabled Omen Max, or even some of the OLED displays you can get as an option on the Omen Max displays. Now that said, though, it doesn't detract from the actual experience here. It gets plenty bright, so we'll just do a brightness test here. So we can say that this is full brightness in a brightly lit room environment such as this here, where I have lots of studio lighting. As you can see here, it dims down, but it actually stays pretty usable here if you're actually reading or working in the dark, particularly in a very low light situation. And when we bring the brightness back up here, it gets plenty bright as well to counteract any indoor lighting. And because this is not an OLED display, you don't have that extra filter layering or any glass surface on top. You're not going to have as much of an issue with dealing with glare here with lighting indoors. I've got a light off to the side here, a light up top, and a light over on the left hand side here, and it seems to be handling the reflections pretty well as long as I angle my display. So this is a test of the display's refresh rate here using the actual Test UFO website. As we can see here, that despite the Windows control panel still reporting 165 Hz, indeed eco mode using the Omen Gaming Hub, when you're unplugged, does toggle you down to 60 FPS. So this is the refresh rate that we're seeing here in an unplugged mode on this particular laptop. Now, if we turn the brightness down, this is going to be a real test here. Even with the brightness turned all the way down to 0%, or basically even around 30%, which will be very good if you want to prolong the battery life on this device, the text is actually quite readable. It maintains good contrast and readability and uniformity, and enough luminosity that you can actually read this without straining your eyes that much. And if you swap the color scheme here, white on black, you get even more visibility and contrast, so the text becomes even more readable. So if you're working in a dark environment, use the dark mode. This is going to be a great laptop for doing that. Of course, consuming content on this display is a joy. Because this is an IPS panel, you're not going to get those deep inky blacks. However, the resultant images that you get a non-reflective, and a pretty decent saturation with that 100 sRGB image here, which I think looks particularly good. Unless you're a pixel peeper or you're very specific about the different colors or the contrast of the display, I think this is going to be a fantastic display to enjoy any kind of content here. If you're watching movies, playing games, or anything in between. In fact, you can even probably do just a little bit of color correction work here, though this is not a DCI-P3 certified display, so you can get away with it if you're an amateur and you're just getting out into that space and kind of exploring a little bit. As you can see here, the greens, the reds, the blues have plenty of saturation. There's lots of contrast. Even the orange hues and the reds of those rocks there look pretty fantastic. I do not have any complaints in terms of the visual color representation of this 100% sRGB display. IPS panels have come a long way, and I'm glad that we've moved away from TN panels. I still would love to see a compromise in the middle, where I'd love to see OLED panels with non-reflective coatings like what we've seen from the Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra. I know that's a phone, but those same coatings can be applied to laptops. Hopefully we'll start to see those next year with tandem OLED displays that are capable of 15 to 1600 nits of peak brightness, which means we're really going to benefit from correct and true HDR displays. Alright, let's quickly talk about the actual specs here of this laptop. So this one features the Intel Core Ultra 7 255H, which is this year's latest and greatest from Intel. So this 8 series here, I think also is another great choice that Lenovo has made for this laptop. There's no reason to put an HX CPU in here because it's just going to generate an excessive amount of heat. Now keep in mind that the Ultra 7 versus the Ultra 9, the biggest difference is the amount of heat generation and the amount of power that they consume. So Ultra 7 is going to give you the best bang for your buck in terms of performance, thermal management, heat generation, and of course keeping the laptop cool and quiet. So this one has 16 threads here with 16 cores. Intel has adopted a new model where they're actually no longer specifying the differences between the P cores and the E cores here. It just says 16 cores, and that's what we've got here. Although it is a combination of E cores plus P cores in terms of the CPU's composition. Paired this here with the Intel's, we have this paired with the 5600 mega transfers per second of SODIMM RAM, which means you have 2 slots here. You can potentially swap these out and upgrade to faster RAM and go all the way up to 64 gigabytes, though we have 32 gigabytes on here. You may even want to try 48 gigabyte modules to go up to perhaps 96 gigabytes of total capacity. However, that is not tested and that is not claimed by HP in terms of what is officially supported for this particular laptop. Now, being that this is the AI era that we're living in and everything is got to have the AI moniker on it, we also have the Intel AI Boost NPU on here, but as you can see that this thing pretty much still sits dead. Nothing uses this freaking thing, and it's an absolute shame considering that we have this hardware on the silicon taking up physical hardware space and of course energy, but they're not really being utilized as well. Even if you run something like LM Studio on your laptop, it's not really going to make use of the NPU without a lot of bells and whistles and hassles to jump through and hoops and whatnot. So anyways, that is the scenario of this story. Now, this one here is paired with the fastest or the most powerful iGPU for this generation as well with the Core Ultra 2 series. We have the 140T iGPU here, the Arc 140T. So this one is the fastest iGPU with 16 gigabytes of RAM. That means if you decide for whatever reason, I don't know, maybe you're just one of those people that you want to be on the fringe minority, that you disable your direct or discrete GPU altogether for the most part and use entirely just the Arc iGPU for gaming, that is entirely a possibility as well. And we'll demonstrate a little bit later here using some of the latest AAA games such as Borderlands 4 that, hey, you know what? You can actually use the iGPU in this laptop with the discrete GPU totally disabled for some actual silent gaming. Although you're not going to get, the highest presets, nor you're going to get the highest in terms of visual fidelity. But hey, we're going to demonstrate that a little bit later for you today. And of course, the star of the show here is the RTX 5070, 8 gigabytes of VRAM here. What the fish are you doing, NVIDIA? I mean, I really don't know what to say here in 2025, and they're still offering us a measly 8 gigabytes of video RAM on 5070, which is supposed to be a mid-range GPU. So basically, the 5070 has become, the hated orphan. Nobody wants this thing. Everybody wants either a 5050 because, they think it's plenty just to get some gaming done, or everybody wants a 58 or a 5090 because that's what people believe is going to be future-proof. Spoiler alert, none of these things are future-proof. Even if you buy a 5090 laptop today, I believe in about 2.5 years, you're going to be buying something new. That's just the state of the industry where we stand today. Anyway, that's enough for the spec. I think it's going to have enough performance and enough power to do everything you can throw at it, including AI, thanks to that NPU, hopefully, which starts to get more utilization in 2026 as software starts to support it and catch up to the hardware that's actually been delivered. Usually it's kind of the opposite. However, this is the state where we stand today, and you can take a look at some of the other benchmarks that I've done on the screen for you while I just kind of talk my way through this and continue babbling here about CPUs and GPUs. Now, the Intel 255H actually I found to be the best CPU in my opinion of 2025, even better than the Zen 5 offerings. It is just very highly optimized. It's quite efficient. It really sips on battery life compared to its AMD counterparts this year, and Intel is winning, although not by much, I would say, with the 255H, and that iGPU here really rocks. So I think overall it's a very compelling package. You should not have any qualms whatsoever about picking up an Intel CPU equipped laptop this holiday season. If you're in the market to buy, pair it with a 5050 or 5060. If you can save a few $100 there, and you're going to have a great time thanks to multi-frame generation and NVIDIA's latest DLSS 4. And let's just say a few words here about the Omen Gaming Hub. So this continues to get improved, and I'm actually pretty happy with the way that Omen has been taking this. HP has been doing a pretty good job here. However, I do have a few complaints this year, so let's talk about this very quickly. When you land at the home screen here, it's starting to get a little bit more busier than I would have liked. We have Omen 16 up here, which is our device that we can control. We have some general PC stats, and then we have a lot of other stuff here that I think nobody's really going to pay attention to. Top deals, for example, gallery, for example, recent games, and of course Omen AI beta, which still is in beta and really doesn't do much with the exception of a few select games that it supports. Then finally we have performance here, so Omen AI, power and thermals here. You can switch this to auto switch it to performance mode when the power is plugged in. You can also use auto switch to eco mode when you unplug the power. These are actually pretty handy to have. You do have that new unleashed mode here, which basically cranks everything to max. We'll talk about that in just a moment here. And then a few other things here, booster, cleaner, network optimizer, which I honestly don't think really do very much. So the only game I have that's supported here by Omen AI currently is Counter-Strike 2. However, we have overlays here, so you can set up overlays for your Omen display here, so you can monitor things such as stats, GPU, RAM, etc., etc. So you can play with that at your own leisure. Then you finally have all of this here, which I believe is new, and I'm not really a big fan of. I saw this earlier with the Omen Max earlier in the year, but I think really this is just starting to clutter up the fact that what you had once as a clean control center, or a relatively clean control center, is now starting to get busy and filled with stuff here that really doesn't necessarily add any level of value in my opinion. Now, one thing that is pretty cool here is you have this camera and voice enhancer. So for example, if we enable this here, it needs to install some drivers, of course. There's lots of little SDKs that it needs to use. But if you do install these drivers, okay, and then annoyingly, once you've installed the driver, you'll need to reboot your PC, which is, okay, so after a rather annoying reboot here, yes, there we are. So we can see here that with our PC, and we can turn on background effects. So, oh, freezing there. Hello? Do not freeze, please. Hello? We'll try a background. So this is obviously just more than a little bit buggy. And also, okay, wow, that was some serious lag. I don't know who even asked for this feature, considering you have NVIDIA Broadcast and you can do all of this stuff there. But hey, it's there, I guess, if you want to play with it. Thank you, HP, for including it in an Omen Gaming Hub, I suppose. We certainly could have, used it there. So auto framing also will center the camera, even though I'm sitting off to the side here a little bit. No, okay, that's pretty decent. Oh, we can do zoom. Woohoo! Thank you very much. What's happening there? Okay. And we have video noise removal, will enable everything. Enabling too many camera effects concurrently can cause performance drops. Well, I guess we're not going to be enabling everything then, are we? I'm going to disable that. It's only a 1080p 30 FPS camera, but hey, this is a budget device nonetheless, so we cannot fault it all that much. We also have here the audio output and the microphone adjustments here. You can do noise removal. If you have a lot of noise in the room, you can do room echo removal if that's something you would like. If you have air conditioning and other stuff here, which is actually pretty handy that they've got all these kind of profiles built in for fans, echoes, air conditioning in the room, you can kind of tune those out if you're going to be using this PC for streaming. And you're trying to do everything on a budget here. This is actually pretty handy, I think, overall. Though I think this is powered by NVIDIA Broadcast, I'm really not sure. It looks like it's just an integration of NVIDIA Broadcast into Omen Gaming Hub. You might be better off just to install NVIDIA Broadcast and use it instead of these features, but it is there for you if you so desire. And finally, we have the Omen Lighting Studio here, which also needs an install, very annoyingly. I would love for all of this to be just, quickly installable. Hopefully this won't require a reboot as we required for the camera and voice enhancer features within the Omen Gaming Hub. Let's just see how we fare here. So if you do not have this, by default, the limited amount of lighting controls you have here for this keyboard, which is by the way just a 4-zone keyboard, is just color effects here And if you select advanced, you can adjust the hue or intensity, or you can turn it off altogether. There's very little control in terms of the RGB backlight. Of course, again, it's a more budget-oriented device. It's only got 4 zones here. It's not per key RGB keyboard. All right, so the lighting for this device is currently installed by Omen Lighting Studio. Would you like to proceed with basic lighting? Open the Light Studio. Oh, so this is actually a different application now. All right, so if you want advanced effects, I suppose you can select the whole keyboard, and let's see if we can do blinking. Yeah, let's try blinking. Oh, are you kidding me? The whole thing is going to blink as one zone? So I guess it's a little bit better because you do have a few custom effects. You can set ocean, jungle, volcano themes, and an Omen theme. Hey, that's pretty cool. They have a predefined Omen theme here in the Omen Light Studio. Of course, if you want to do all of the advanced lighting effects, then you're going to need to install Omen Light Studio. However, if you don't use this, you're going to get just basic lighting here, which is these controls. Of course, you get an option here to launch the Omen Light Studio once you've installed it over here on the right hand side. Now, let's go over to the core of Omen Gaming Hub, which are the actual control for the laptop. So if you go over to System Vitals, you get 3 different screens as always. You have a simple mode, an advanced mode, and a I don't know what the heck is going on here. Lots of information about your PC mode, including serial numbers and whatnot. So pretty handy for that to have. You see just some upfront stats here. If you go over to advanced performance tuning here, performance control, skip the tab. This is where all of the magic happens. So you can control here your different performance mode as well as the unleashed mode. In performance mode here, you also have power settings. You can adjust some additional power to the actual GPU to boost 10 watts. If you go over to the unleashed mode, then and only then can you adjust not only the fan curve fully, but also the PL1, PL2s, etc. for both the CPU, GPU battery drain, and surface temperatures for the device as well, which is kind of unique to the Omen Gaming Hub. If you go over to advanced performance tuning, this is where you do your GPU overclocking. 200 megahertz potentially possible on the CPU or the GPU core, and 400 megahertz possible on the GPU VRAM. If you go to lighting, we just looked at that. And then finally, we have graphics switcher, so you can toggle between discrete mode, integrated graphics only, or hybrid mode to use NVIDIA Optimus. You should leave it as that for the most part. I don't see any benefit of doing so. And then finally, we have key assignments here where you can select keys and map different macros or actions to them if you'd like to have some sort of custom key mapping going on this keyboard. So overall, Omen Gaming Hub definitely has the essentials, but I think with all of this My Games, deals, gallery, etc., it's starting to become a little bit cluttered, a little bit more so than I would like. And for those of you who like to keep your control center simple, of course, the initial install for this game is a little bit heavy. For the Omen Gaming Hub is a little bit heavy. Once you've installed it, though, however, subsequent launches of the actual software is actually pretty quick and not too bad. So overall, I would say that it's improved a lot. However, there's really room here for HP to slim this down, not let it bloat like other softwares have, and I think this will be a winner. All right, and we'll do a quick typing test here on this keyboard. Okay, so now we are inside this laptop. Let's talk a bit about how we did that. So there is some screws that I believe are captive here. So there's 2 screws at the bottom here. There's 2 screws on the side here. These screws are longer, and there's 2 what appear to be captive screws at the top of the actual bottom panel here. So once you get that off, let's set that aside here. We'll talk about what's inside this actual laptop. So we can see here that this is a traditional heat pipe design. We don't have vapor chamber cooling here, but you can see here we have some pretty decent sized fans here and here. Only 2 fans on this device, and we have what looks like two heat pipes which are shared, and then we have 1 dedicated heat pipe each, which is separated for CPU and of course for GPU as well. We do have 2 RAM slots here, so these are the standard SODIMMs, so you could potentially swap this out for more capacitive RAM, so you could go up to 64 gigabytes, perhaps even 48 gigabytes, or 32 or 24 gigabyte modules will work here for a total of 48 or 96 gigabytes, but that remains to be tested. It's not officially supported nor stated by HP in the official specifications. And then over on the left hand side here to that, we have the SSD, single SSD here, what looks like a heatsink, which wasn't quite mounted. I don't know, maybe it's been opened a few times, because this is of course a sample unit after all, but this is supposed to help dissipate some of the heat from that Gen 4 SSD that's on board here. And despite what it looks like, we don't seem to have an additional slot here for SSD storage. Full bottom of the device here is just the battery. As you can see here, we have a nice battery that takes up the whole view, and we do also have a Wi-Fi module here that is user replaceable just with this screw here, but doesn't look like we have any additional SSD slots, which is quite unfortunate. But again, considering that this is a mid-range offering, I'm not too surprised here. I think that's pretty par for the course. All right, so after a gameplay session for quite a while here running in the performance mode, let's take a look at the thermal performance of this device here. So as we can expect, it's actually running pretty cool despite only being cooled by heat pipes and not having any kind of vapor chamber in this device here. So we can see here some hot spots up here, 41 degrees. This one up here is 45 degrees. This does not get very hot. Now, considering that HP has done a pretty good job and this thing weighs 5 pounds, which is kind of I would say mid tier in terms of the weight scale for these devices. This is actually a pretty good performer. So if you don't mind the 5070 and don't mind the 8 gigabytes of VRAM, you're actually gonna have a pretty good time here in terms of the actual performance from this device. So here I am playing Borderlands 4. I'm playing right now in the eco mode. So our temperatures here, as you can see, are 65 on the CPU and 62 degrees on the GPU. Chassis temperatures is sitting at 43 degrees here. In this mode, we don't really get much control over our power settings or whatnot on the RTX 5050 inside, but we can see here that despite that, we're getting close to 140 to 150 frames per second here. Of course, this is running in, we'll just take a look at the video settings here. So high preset, DLSS is enabled, set to balance mode. And of course we have frame generation turned on, and we're using the multi-frame generation with 4x. So that means we're going to get as much frames from this GPU as we can here. So with that, the RTX 5050 is giving us close to 140 to 150 frames. We're nearly maxing out the 165 Hertz on this display, which is actually pretty impressive considering that we're playing almost in a silent mode here. There's very little fan noise. So we'll take a look. Just barely 42 decibels here. If I was to turn up the sound, this would easily drown out the fan noise from the laptop here, and it would be very easy to play in this mode for quite some time. So what we'll do now is we'll crank it up a little bit. Let's go up a notch into the balance mode. The balance mode, all it allows us to do is toggle between auto and max fans mode. We'll leave it to auto. I don't believe there's any reason here to blast the fans in balance mode. It's only going to boost the GPU by a little bit more in terms of wattage. It's not going to go all the way up to 100 watts or nearly 100 watts that So perhaps a little bit more in terms of the fan noise, around 43, perhaps 44 decibels on occasion here, but really not all that much difference. Things don't really change in terms of the wattage and of course the performance until you actually toggle into performance mode. The other thing I want to point out here with performance mode is it also now gives you the ability to adjust power setting. So as you can see here, I've enabled a smart performance gain, which is extra 10 watts being fed to the GPU. So this will basically try to push as much wattage to the 5050 so we can get the best performance here. If we now hop over, we'll see that now it should start to make more noise because this will actually start to feed that RTX 5050 with a lot more juice here. And that's kind of what we need to get better performance here from this device. If we leave it to the stock settings here, it's not really going to make much difference. Whoops, should have reloaded, I guess, or reloaded, I guess. All right, I love this gun here. This just kind of pops heads. We'll just pop some heads here while we're demoing performance mode. Roughly 47 decibels here, and if we look at our Omen Gaming Hub, 73 on the CPU, 70 on the GPU, so temps are well in check. Chassis temperature has risen by only 2 degrees, so we're getting some pretty darn good performance here. And finally, we've cranked it up to unleashed mode here, so this basically pushes as much watt as it can to that CPU as well as the GPU here. So that Core Ultra 9 is going to get 60 watts, 77 and 150 watts here for PL4. We're still pushing 10 extra watts to the GPU. Our battery drain, we're going to crank this all the way up so we can basically drain as much juice from the battery as we can, I suppose. I don't know why you'd want to do that. And our chassis temp limit is now moved up to 50, so it allows it to get really hot and really loud, though that's really not the case here, as we'll see in just a moment. So we still have pretty darn good performance. 150 150, 160. There's a lot of variability in this game because depending on where you're at, what's happening on screen, it can change quite a bit. But okay, let's just say that it's 51 decibels, which I think is still far better than the 56, 57, or even 60 decibels on some gaming laptops you would have seen just a year or two ago. So this is really a big improvement. I think HP has done a great job here. Though this thing does not have a vapor chamber, this is just standard heat pipe design because we only get a 4070 in this device here. You can't spec it higher than that. So we can see here still about 150 to 160 FPS. We're pretty much maxing out the display here. Despite being an IPS display, the 165 Hz is plenty for gaming. It's nice and smooth. I don't have any issues with that. And roughly, I'll give it the benefit of the doubt and say 50 decibels here in terms of the actual fan noise from this device. Now, keep in mind that touching the chassis anywhere except for really up here, like far close to the hinge, is nice and cool. There's no heat. There's a little bit of warmth, like just slight, ever so slight warmth, on the top row here. But if you're on the WAS keys, there's no heat dissipated to your fingers. You're going to be just fine. You can comfortably play using the keyboard on the device for many, many hours, as I have done so prior to this. So that said, I think overall the thermal performance of this is excellent. Although, one tip for you guys, don't play in unleashed mode. That extra 5 decibels of noise is not worth it. Play in performance, you're really not going to notice all that much in terms of the performance drop. And overall, the temps are going to be a little bit warmer, 74, 75 degrees on both CPU, GPU, which I think still is fantastic considering we were in the 90s and 100-degree temps on the devices just a few years ago. So play in this mode, you're going to have far less fan noise, which means you're going to be able to enjoy your game. And if you turn up the music like so, or volume, I guess in this case, let's see if we can find the right button here. Plenty. It easily takes over, the fan noise, and you can drown it out without worrying too much. And you can start to enjoy your game. So even if you don't have a nice pair of headphones here, just put this in performance mode, crank the volume all the way up, and you can enjoy some gaming on this device. Good night. Okay, let's say a few words here about the battery life. So this is equipped with an 83 watt hour 6L lithium-ion battery by HP, and it states here that this thing also supports using the Type-C port on the left-hand side. Power delivery 3.0, that means you can charge it up to 100 watts if you need to in a pinch. That'll allow you to get through the most of the workday without having to carry the big power brick. Not that it's actually that large or that heavy. But one thing you should definitely do is come into Omen Gaming Hub to optimize this for battery operation, is to toggle this auto switch to eco mode to on. This will basically switch over to eco mode, which will also reduce the display's refresh rate to 60 Hz. In addition, you should also click on the Windows settings here, toggle energy saver mode, which will also bring the brightness of the display down to around 50%. Of course, you can adjust that manually as well, but usually around 50% will give you good optimization for your battery life while still retaining good readability and luminosity of the display, so you're not actually struggling to see what's on the screen. And as you can see here with this, the battery life predicted here is 77% remaining. I would say that this 83 watt hours battery is going to give you between 3 to 4, potentially 4.5 hours of battery life here, considering how optimized and efficient the 255H CPU is, the Core Ultra 7 in this laptop. However, I don't think it's going to be beyond that. That said, though, it does have fast charging support on board, so you can charge up to 50% battery life in 30 minutes, which is great if you're in a pinch, using the supplied AC power adapter, which is a barrel pin. And I think that's really all there is to say about battery life here. These laptops are not battery life champs by any means of the imagination. Perhaps next year when we start to see Panther Lake laptops drop and Zen 6 CPUs, maybe we'll start to see battery life uptick in gaming laptops, which allow us to reach perhaps a full day of actual usage, a mixed usage scenario, rather than just, having to toggle all of these switches and basically playing in a playing dead in order to achieve this battery life. All right, so then in conclusion, my thoughts on the Omen 16 for 2025 featuring the RTX 5070 and the Intel Core 2 Ultra 7 255-8 CPU with a 1200p screen at 165 Hz and an 83 watt hour battery at 16 inches, I think is a pretty hit, pretty hit the device in my opinion. It's got all the right combination. The HP has chosen to use the right type of screen, the right resolution of screen, paired with the right CPU that can actually drive it, and the right GPU, which can actually saturate the full refresh rate of the display without too much trouble utilizing DLSS 4 and NVIDIA's frame generation technologies. Now you saw just a brief preview as I looked at the thermals and the gameplay of Borderlands 4 here, but stay tuned for a more dedicated video on my channel that will focus on a broader spectrum of games and testing of the actual gameplay and performance with the 5070 in the Omen 16. If you are so interested, please get subscribed to see that. And if you like my content, please click on the like button, click subscribe, and click on the notification bell so you're the first to know when there's new content available here. And as always, if you wish to purchase any of the devices that I review, check the links in the description below. I often include discount codes to help you save a little bit of money. And a special thanks to HP for sending out this laptop. It goes back to there once I'm done with this review. And as always, if you want to support the channel a little bit further, you can use the coffee link in the description below to give us a tip. It's a small gesture, but it's really appreciated and goes a long ways to help independent creators such as myself. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.